I hated the Philippines.
And as soon as we got there, it was bad news.
It was one of those places where you sort of knew they were waiting for a fight, you know.
It was a negative, very negative vibe the moment we got off the plane. So we were kind of like a bit frightened. We got in this car, and not even with Neil. The guy just drove off with us four, and our bags were on the runway.
They left them on the runway, and those little briefcases had the marijuana in them, right? So I had to, while the confusion was going on and others, I just sort of put them in the boot of the limo I was going to be in, right? And just said, take me to where you've taken the Beatles.
I was thinking, God, you know, this is it. We're going to get busted. And they took us away and drove us down to the Manila harbour and put us on a boat, took us out to this kind of motor yacht that was anchored out in the harbour.
I never really understood that. I never really understood why they got put on this boat.
I just remember Brian Epstein really flustered. And he must have been with, maybe the Philippine promoter or somebody, agent or something. And he was like yelling and shouting, and he appeared on the scene, and then there was all yelling going on, and then they took us back off the boat, put us back in a car, and drove us to a hotel suite where we were. And then we did a concert. The concert, again, had a big problem because Brian Epstein had made a contract for a stadium or a situation of so many people, I don't know how many thousand people, maybe, you know, 2,000 to 5,000 people, something like that. When we got there, it was like the Monterey Pop Festival. I mean, it was just millions. There was 200,000 people in that site.
We did the show, and I didn't know, personally, I didn't know anything about that Madame Marcus had invited us to dinner.
We don't normally get invited. It's usually silly ambassadors want to see us around the place. But, you know, so somebody just set it up, and he had to go along with it, and we didn't know about it.
It is indeed a great honour, but it's our day off, so we can't go. And we're very firm about that, because we don't get many days off. We're not stuffing in some sort of royal reception, you know.
John and I were sharing a room after the gig, and then we woke up in the morning, and we phoned down for breakfast. And the newspapers, because we always like to read about ourselves. I thought, yeah, can we have, you know, egg and bacon, whatever we were eating in those days, and the newspapers, all the newspapers, you know, and yes. We were just hanging out in our beds, chatting, you know, doing whatever we were doing, and so time went by, so we called down again. Excuse me, you know, can we have the breakfast, blah, blah, blah. And still nothing happened, and so we put the TV on. And there was this horrific TV show of Madame Marcus screaming, you know, they've let me down. And all these shots of the cameraman took the camera onto like these empty plates and up into these little kids' faces all crying because the Beatles hadn't turned up.
And the TV commentators saying, and they're still not here yet, and you know, the Beatles are, you know, supposed to be here, and we sat there in amazement, couldn't believe it, and we just watched ourselves not arriving at the presidential palace. Now, I don't recall much of what happened after that until the newspapers arrived, and the TV news and everything. It was Beatles snub first family.
So then things started to get really weird, you know, come on, get out of bed, get packed, we're getting out of here. And as we started to get to the car, we really had no help. And we got downstairs like one motorbike. You know, after this huge motorcade brought us in, there was just this one guy. And we get to the airport, and there's chanting, people hating us all the way.
So we got there, and we got put into the transit lounge. And then we got pushed around from one corner of the lounge to another, you know.
You treat like ordinary passenger, passenger, you were saying. It's an ordinary passenger, he doesn't get kicked, does he?
And so they started knocking over our road managers and things, and everyone was falling all over the place.
They started worrying you when the road manager got knocked over.
Yeah, and I swear there was 30 of them.
What do you say they were?
Well, I saw 5 in sort of outfits, you know, that were sort of doing it, the actual kicking and booing and shouting.
Did you get kicked?
No, I was very delicate and moved every time they touched me. But I was petrified. I could have been kicked and not known it. I just know I was
Getting booed.
You know, and there's the famous story of John and I hiding behind these nuns because we thought it's a Catholic country, they won't beat up the nuns.
And then we got on the plane, which was a British Airways, we were all kissing the seats and everything. You know, this is Britain, little piece of Britain. I was feeling like that, you know, you were definitely in a foreign country with all the rules had changed, and they did carry guns after all, so, you know, you weren't too sort of gung-ho about it all. And then one of our guys, an announcement came over.
You're saying, well, Mr. Epstein and Mr. Evans and Mr. Barrow, that was Tony Barrow, I believe, he was our press agent at the time. Will they get off the plane? And Mal, who was the nicest, gentlest person, was a big guy, but he was really sweet. He went past me on down the aisle of the plane to get off, and he was breaking out in tears, and he turned to me and he said, "Tell Lil I love her." That's his wife. Because he thought that was it, you know. I mean, the plane was going to go and he was going to be stuck in Manila. And anyway, we sat there again for, it seemed like a couple of hours. It was probably 30 minutes, maybe an hour. And they got back on the plane, and then the plane was allowed to leave. Apparently they took the money off Brian Epstein that we'd earned at the concert. And that was it. We got out of there, and it was such a relief, but I felt such resentment for those people.
But it was really frightening. Well, it's probably the most frightening. I've never been back, actually.
We just never go to any nut houses again.
But now I got it, the world is good. Spread the word, you'll be free.
But the nice thing about it was that in the end, when we found out that it was Marcos and what he'd been doing to his people, and that it was Imelda and what she'd been doing, and the rip-off that the whole thing apparently, allegedly was, we were kind of glad to have done it. So great, we must have been the only people who dared ever snub Marcos.
Do any of you have plans to record on your own?
English voice.
We do at home. We might. Eh?
In fact, we have done, I think.
Have we?
Well, Eleanor Rigby was Paul on his own, and
we were just drinking tea.
Eleanor Rigby picks up the rice in the church where the wedding has been. Ah, look at all the lonely people.
I have prepared a statement which I will read, which has had John Lennon's absolute approval this afternoon with myself by telephone. And this is as follows. The quote which John Lennon made to a London columnist more than 3 months ago has been quoted and represented entirely out of context.
I mean, early in 1966, John gave an interview to Maureen Cleave, do you remember her, at the Evening Standard, in which he made a chance remark saying, the Beatles are more popular than Jesus Christ.
Was it a mistake? I don't know. In the short term, yeah, maybe not in the long term. But he said, oh, I don't know what's wrong with the church at the moment. The Beatles are bigger than Jesus Christ, you know, like they're not building Jesus enough. They ought to do more, like gospel and all this stuff. Well, that was taken out of context over in America.
So there was, you know, all this big palaver going on, and anyway, we got to America. I think we did a press conference where John basically, under the pressure of the cameras and the press, and, you know, just the stress of having to deal with this thing that he, in effect, had caused.
If it had said television is more popular than Jesus, I might have got away with it. You know, but as I just happened to be talking to a friend, I used the word Beatles as a remote thing, not as what I think, as Beatles as though those other Beatles like other people see us. And I just said they are having more influence on kids and things than anything else, including Jesus. But I said it in that way, which is the wrong way, yap yap.
Well, some teenagers have said, have repeated your statements that the Beatles, I like the Beatles more than Jesus Christ. What do you think about that?
Well, originally I was pointed out that fact in reference to England, that we meant more to kids than Jesus did, or religion at that time. I wasn't knocking it or putting it down, I was just saying it as a fact. And it is true, especially more for England than here. You know, but I'm not saying that we're better or greater or comparing us with Jesus Christ as a person or God as a thing or whatever it is. You know, I just said what I said and it was wrong or was taken wrong, and now it's all this.
The repercussions were big. I mean, there was particularly what they call the Bible Belt. You know, these down the south, they were having a field day, and you know, we've got this footage as well of the disc jockey saying, "Come and bring your Beatle trash and deposit it here."
One of our 14 pickup points in Birmingham, Alabama, and turn them in this week if possible.
Well, the photos we saw of them were a sort of middle-aged DJs and 12-year-olds burning a pile of LP covers.
Millions of kids were burning the Beatle records. There was bonfires of them, you know, which is okay for us because then they rebought them.
The Beatles made a statement in all the newspapers that they're getting more better than Jesus himself, and the Ku Klux Klan, being a religious order, is going to come out here the night that they appear at the Coliseum here, and we're going to demonstrate with different ways and tactics to stop this performance. The Klan is going to come out here because we're the only organization that will come out and make a stop to these accusations. This is nothing but blasphemy, and we're going to try to stop it any terror way we can, but it's going to stop. We're known as a terror organization. I think we have
a terror organization.
We have ways and means to stop this if this is going to be the case. Yes.
What ways and means?
Well, I don't want to say this, but there'll be a lot of surprises Monday night, I believe, when they get here.
People always got the image I was anti-Christ or anti-religious. I'm not at all. I'm a most religious fellow.
Please don't wake me, no, don't shake me, leave me where I am.
Well, it looks like the bloom is off the Beatles. Last year, not an empty seat in Shea Stadium. This year, thousands, perhaps 15 or 20,000 empty seats in this arena that holds 56,000.
Oh dear, what a failure. We only sold 50,000. Miserable. See, we were dying on our feet out there. Yeah, and there was big news about that. You know, they've only sold 50,000 seats. You know, it's all over for the Beatles, says, you know, Roger Whittaker of the Dallas Times.
Okay, I don't ever remember going there twice.
Now tell me the truth. Are you really a Beatles fan, or are you here because it's the right thing to do?
I love the Beatles.
I bet there's a group you like better now.
No, I don't like any group better than the Beatles.
Honestly, aren't the Beatles on their way out?
I don't think so. I think they're still strong.
Do you think the Beatles are out of style?
Never. They'll never go out of style.
Tell me the truth now. Which group do you like better than the Beatles?
The Beatles, all the time. I love them.
It doesn't matter about people not liking our records or not liking the way we look or what we say. You know, they're entitled to not like us, and we're entitled not to have anything to do with them if we don't want to, or not to regard them. You know, we've all got our rights, you know, Harold.
There was this other thing of this woman who was the famous psychic or something, or she was supposed to be. She'd predicted Kennedy's assassination and various other things, and she was saying in the papers about how the Beatles were going to die in a plane crash.
All along this time, there were also death threats they were getting. I mean, it wasn't long since President Kennedy had been assassinated. And I remember going to one of their concerts at the Red Rock Stadium, where I climbed up on one of the entries overlooking the stage with Brian and looked down at the boys below me during the performance. And the amphitheatre of the Red Rocks is such that you could have a sniper on the hill, could pick off any of those fellows at any time, no problem. And I was very aware of this, and so was Brian, and so were the boys.
Generally, it's how much of a good thing can you have? How long can you sustain things? And every tour we'd gone, just gone great, just gone marvellous, but we were getting a bit fed up. anyway, just because we've been at it so long, and it gets grueling, and another holiday in after another, you know that, we all know that one.
And just the general Beatlemania was, it took its toll, and also because we were seeing it then from as no longer as like naive kind of, just on the buzz of our fame and success. By this time, I mean, the dental experience had kind of made us see it from a different light, and it was no longer fun anymore.
I don't think anyone didn't want to stop touring. Probably Paul would have gone on longer than George and I. But you'll have to ask Paul about that.
Oh no, touring's good and it keeps us sharp and we need touring and musicians need to play, I'd keep music live. I'd been sort of a bit that attitude. But finally I agreed with them, and it was like, oh, you were right, I think it was George and John who were particularly against it, particularly got fed up.
We might have been waxworks for half of, what the good we did there. Nobody heard anything, or not even, a basic beat, I don't think. They were too busy tearing each other up.
We were just tired, it had been, 4 years for us of legging around, screaming in this mania. We were tired, we needed a rest.
By the time we got to Candlestick Park, I think we knew now, yeah, sure, this wasn't fun anymore. I think that was the main point. And, we'd always tried to keep, you've got to really try and keep some fun in it for yourself, in anything you do, And we'd been pretty good at that. We'd enjoyed touring, then we'd enjoyed doing a bit of TV, we'd enjoyed Europe, we'd enjoyed America. Wow. But now even America was beginning to pale, because of these conditions you've mentioned, and the fact that we'd done it so many times. So by then it was like, yeah, well, don't tell anyone, but this is probably our last gig.
Yeah, see, there was big talk at Candlestick Park at that very period about, this has got to end. This is it. But we went on further than that. We got back to England before we finally said, that's it.
I certainly felt that was it, that we weren't going to tour again like that. I never really projected into the future. I was just thinking this is going to be such a relief to, to not have to go through that madness.
I don't remember having a negative feeling about the band, but about touring. But you always forget the bad bits anyway. So I generally, about the band, remember it being quite good.
I'm just sorry for the people that can't see us live. Sometimes you haven't missed anything because you wouldn't have heard us, but sometimes I think you might have enjoyed it. I'm sorry for them.
The Beatles were then just 4 lads on that rather dimly lit stage.
You're saying, like, we were getting worse and worse as a band while all those people were screaming. It was lovely that they liked us, but we couldn't hear to play. So the only place we could develop was in the studio where we could hear ourselves.
Also, we were losing interest to play on stage.
And I think the most important thing was the safety aspect, because soon after that it became terrorism and all that kind of stuff. When we were going, there was only us and 2 people. We said all those things that happened, like people threatening Ringo or threatening us, or saying
snipping bits of hair off and stuff.
The plane was going to crash, hurricanes hitting, race riots, student
Wings on
riots.
fire.
There was always something that we pulled into town. There was always some big thing going on, and we'd come in the middle with this mania, and it'd just be like chaos. So it was just becoming too difficult, on the nervous system. That's what I felt.
When we'd all decided it, we said, well, what are we going to do? Like, announce it? The Beatles have given up touring. We said, no, just don't say anything.
But I was really too scared to walk away. I was thinking, well, this is like the end, really. There's no more touring. And I was dead nervous, so I said yes to Dick Lester, that I would make this movie with him. I went to Almeria, Spain for 6 weeks, because I didn't know what to do. What do you do when you don't tour? There's no life.
Ringo came to Spain, right, to Almeria, when John and I were down there.
Yeah, I went and hung out because he was lonely. And, we really supported each other a lot. And so, he was out there being this actor.
John was doing How I Won the War, so I went to India. I think I went for about 6 weeks. And it was a fantastic time. I just, would go out and look at temples and go shopping and, you know, travelled all over. We went to various places, and eventually we went up to Kashmir and stayed on these houseboats up in the middle of the Himalayas, and it was incredible. You know, I'd wake up in the morning, this little Kashmiri fellow would bring us tea and biscuits, and then I could hear Ravi in the next room would be doing his practice, and that was incredible times for me.
George, like you said, was doing the Indian stuff. What was Paul doing? I don't know what he was doing.
George Martin, being able to write and being able to orchestrate and being pretty good at that, I think got an offer through the Bolting brothers for him and me to do some film music for The Family Way. So I had a look at the film. I thought it was a great film. I still do. It's very powerful, emotional, soppy, but good film, I think, for its time. We actually even got an Ivor Novello Award for the best film song that year for a thing called Love in the Open Air.
Yeah?
If you never toured again, would it worry you?
I don't know. No, I don't think so.
Wouldn't worry you?
But because the only thing about that, you see, is that performance for us, see, it's gone downhill, performance, because we can't develop when no one can hear us, you know what I mean? So for us to perform is it's difficult, gets difficult each time.
You mean they don't
More
listen
difficult.
to you, and therefore you don't want to do that?
Oh yeah, we want to do it, but if we're not listened to, then, and we can't even hear ourselves, then we can't improve in that. We can't get any better.
But it meant we could get into the studio and start with Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane and that, and then Pepper.
Were they the first ones?
I don't know, were they? I mean, I seem to remember that was like what happened once we got full-time into the studio. And saying at the time, now our performance is that record.
And that new record started with Strawberry Fields. And that was going to be what became Pepper. It wasn't Pepper. No one heard of Pepper. But it was going to be a record that was going to be made in the studio, and it was going to be songs which they had written which couldn't be performed live. They were designed to be studio productions. And that was the difference.
Well, Strawberry Fields is a song that John had because he used to live next door to this place called Strawberry Fields, which was a Salvation Army place for kids. And he used to bunk over, and it was his little magic garden to sort of play in. So whenever I went to visit him, he'd sort of say, hey, you know, and we'd go past it. He said, this is Strawberry Fields, and he'd give me the gin on it.
Strawberry Fields I wrote when I was making How I Won the War in Almeria, Spain. It's a Salvation Army home that was near the house I lived in with my auntie in the suburbs. Although I took the name as an image.
We had this thing called the Mellotron that we did the intro of Strawberry Fields on. This, in fact, is one of them. We had flutes on there, and this was the intro.
Strawberry fields forever.
And, you know, the nice thing is then a lot of our stuff then started to get a little bit more surreal. And then Penny Lane was a little bit more surreal too, although a sort of cleaner thing. I remember saying to George Martin, like a very clean recording. I was into clean sounds, maybe Beach Boy-y kind of things at that point. But, you know, the fireman with his hourglass and all of that sort of stuff was us trying to get into a bit of art, a bit of surrealism. And they were all based on real things. But I mean, whereas there was a barber called, what was he called, Bioletti? Something like that. Little barber, I think he's still there actually in Penny Lane. And he had these pictures that all the barbers have of the haircut you can have if you ask for, I'll have number 3, that, you know. And only instead of saying the barber with pictures of haircuts in his windows, you know, then it was, you'd change it round to every head he's had the pleasure to know. A barber showing photographs like it's an exhibition. It was all just twisting it to a little bit slightly more artsy angle.
Penny Lane is not only a street, but it's a district. I lived in Penny Lane in a street called Newcastle Road. So I was the only actual person that lived in Penny Lane.
Penny Lane is in my ears and in my eyes.
Well, really, it was Paul who'd been on a train journey or a plane journey with Mal Evans and come up with this idea of Sgt. Pepper, and he was just kind of, to me, we were just in the studio to make the next record, and he was going on about this idea of, you know, some fictitious band.
Sgt. Pepper's Paul after a trip to America, and the whole West Coast long-named group thing was coming in. You know, when people were no longer the Beatles or the Crickets, they were suddenly treading these incredible shrinking Grateful aeroplanes, right?
At the time, there were lots of those sort of bands that were, you know, Laughing Joe and his Medicine Band, Thank You, Wham Bam Mam kind of group names, you know. Colonel Tucker's Medicinal Brew and Compound. So I just thought, oh, well, you know, if there was a band, what would be a mad name for it?
Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band!
It was basically Paul's idea to call Pepper. He came in and said, you know, he had this song, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and he was kind of identifying it with the band, the Beatles themselves. And I think we recorded the song first, and then the idea came to make it into an idea for the album, which was also triggered by Neil Aspinall, who said at that time,
why don't we have Sgt. Pepper as the compa? You know, he comes on at the beginning of the show, introduces the band, right? And then at the end of every Beatles show, Paul always used to say, it's, you know, it's time to go, you know, we got to go to bed, and, you know, this is our last number. You know, do the last number and go. And I said to Paul, why doesn't Sgt. Pepper come on at the end of the album and say, you know, well, that's it, we've got to go, you know, here's our last number, right? And send the album on tour instead of the band, right? So we liked that idea.
And one of the things I know, we'd read a report somewhere that had said Elvis Presley has sent his gold-plated Cadillac out on tour. And we just thought that was like the greatest idea going, because we'd been touring and sending ourselves out. We thought, that's a really good idea. You stay at home and send your car. And true enough, it did go on tour, and people had come, and they'd pay money and just wander around it like it was an exhibit at Madame Tussauds or something, you know, and he didn't have to be there. So at the time in the 60s when we were thinking of doing Sgt. Pepper, which is when we didn't want to tour, that idea suddenly sounded very nifty, you know. So we said, well, we haven't got gold-plated Cadillacs, we don't do that stuff. But we could send a record out on tour.
I mean, it was Sgt. Pepper and his Lonely Hearts Club Band and all these other acts. And it was going to all run, you know, like the rock opera. And we got as far as Sgt. Pepper and then Billy Shears. A little help from my friends, and then everyone said, sod it, let's just do tracks. So it started out with its own, you know, that it was going to be something totally different, but it still then kept the title and like also the feel that it's all connected.
It's called the first concept album. It doesn't go anywhere. Mr. Kite, all my contributions have absolutely nothing to do with this idea of Sgt. Pepper and his band. But it works, because we said it worked, and that's how it appeared.
It was 20 years ago today when Sgt. Pepper taught the band to play. Oh, I get by with a little help from my friends.
Starts out with Sgt. Pepper and introduces Billy Shears, and that's the end, apart from the so-called reprise. Otherwise, every other song could have been on any other album. Right. A Day in the Life could have gone anywhere. Mr. Kite could have gone anywhere.
For the benefit of Mr. Kite, there will be a show tonight on Trampoline.
Really spending a long time in the studio. And we were still doing the basic tracks like we always did. And then it would take weeks for the overdubs. And also the great thing about this band was whoever had the idea, that was okay. Whoever had the best idea, it didn't matter who. That's the one we'd use.
For instance, Day in the Life, John and I sat down, and he had this opening verse. I think he'd got the idea, or we then took the idea from like the Daily Mirror or something.
So it had two stories. One was the Guinness child had killed himself in a car. That was the main headline story. On the next page was about 4,000 holes in Blackburn, Lancashire.
So the Blackburn, Lancashire, the holes, Albert Hall, all just got mixed, you know, just a little poetic jumble that sounded nice.
Probably the most momentous song on the album, A Day in the Life, began in a very simple way. And we've got the rehearsal take one, the very first time we heard it, with John giving a few instructions to people, as usual, just before he starts it.
Have the mic on the piano quite low, just to keep it like maracas, you know.
John was singing while he was playing his acoustic guitar. Paul was on piano. George was playing maracas, I think, and certainly Ringo was on bongos. John counts in by saying, "Sugar Plum Fairy, Sugar Plum Fairy."
Sugar Plum Fairy, Sugar Plum Fairy.
Even in this early take, he has a voice which sends shivers down the spine.
It was mainly a John song, and he had the, I read the news today, oh boy. And he'd taken a lot of it from a newspaper. And then I had another bit. Woke up, fell out of bed, dragged a comb across my head. That was a little bit I had. It wasn't doing anything. And so we thought, well, that'd be good. We could put that in the middle. And we got the concept of sort of building it a little bit like a sort of mini operetta.
Well, let's shove it in the middle and see if we can't connect them up in some way. We connected them with a series of empty bars on either side of Paul's section before we came back into John's as a reprise. And we knew we had to fill those bars with something sensational. And we didn't know what it was going to be yet. And in order to keep the 24 bars so that everybody knew when to come back in again, dear old Mal Evans stood by the piano counting the bars. And just to add further weight to it, he set off an alarm clock at the end of it to trigger everybody back into it again. They told me they wanted an orchestral climax to fill these empty bars, a giant orgasm of sound, rising from nothing at all to the most incredible noise. And this is what we came up with. And with that, we joined up the two parts of the song.
The moment I remember best, outside of, say, him bringing the song, it was obviously a gorgeous song when he brought it. And I was a big fan of John's. You've got to remember that, you know. It wouldn't just be, oh, yes, professional person will write this. It'd be like, oh, yeah, I can't wait to get my hands on this. And I'd learn the chords off him and we'd develop it. But the moment I remember was when we got to a little bit that he didn't have, where we sort of said, I'd love to turn you on. And we like looked at each other and think like, we know what we're doing here, don't we? We're actually saying for the first time ever, like words like turn you on, you know, and which was in the culture anyway, but no one had actually said it on record yet. And there was a little sort of look of recognition between us, like, do it, get it down.
So, you know, the sleeve came and we wanted to dress up and we wanted to be these people, you know, the Peppers. And, you know, let's get suits and, you know, it was flower power. I mean, coming into its fullest. You know, that's what it was.
And anyway, you know, then Mal and I just went to all the different libraries and got prints, and Peter Blake blew them up and tinted them and made the collage.
I remember the weekend it was released, getting like a telegram off people like sort of James Fox, long live Sgt. Pepper. And, you know, people had come round and said, oh, great album, man. So it got very noticed as sort of, it was like you were making it for us, our crowd.
I think it did represent what the young people were on about. And it seemed to coincide with a revolution in young people's thinking. And it was the kind of, I suppose, the epitome of the swinging 60s. It's sort of linked up with Merry-Quant and miniskirts and all that kind of thing. And dope to a certain extent. You know, the freedom of sex, the freedom of soft drugs like marijuana and so on. I suppose that was all a bit exciting, and I think it did reflect its time.
I thought it was great. I thought it was a huge advance. I was very pleased because the newspapers, the musical papers, had been saying recently, a month or two before, what are the Beatles up to? Drying up, I suppose. And so it was nice making an album like Pepper, thinking, yeah, drying up, I suppose that's right, yeah. So it was lovely to have that on them, you know. When it came out, I was Loved it. I kind of had a party, you know, sort of celebrate. That weekend was a bit of a party, as I recall. And, you know, I remember getting lots of telegrams, as I say, from people. It was obvious people knew it. And the biggest single sort of tribute for me was that it was released on the Friday, and on the Sunday we went to the Savile Theatre, which Brian Epstein rented on the Savile, and ran some rock shows, because nothing ever happened on a Sunday. And Jimi Hendrix opened with Sgt. Pepper, and he'd only had since the Friday to learn.
Well, Sgt. Pepper for me was great because it's a fine album. It's a fine album, but I did learn to play chess on it because I'd have so much spare time, you know. We'd do the basic track and then we'd put other stuff on, and then the percussion would be overdubbed later and later, you know.
For me, it was kind of a bit tiring, or it was a bit boring because I mean, I had a few moments in there that I enjoyed, but generally I didn't really like that album much. My heart was still in India, you know. I mean, that was the big thing for me when that happened in the '66. It was after that, everything else seemed like hard work, you know. It was a job. It was like doing something I didn't really want to do. I was losing interest in being fab at that point.
Wasn't that spectacular? I mean, when you look back on it, I mean, like anything, it was great then. But people just have this dream about Pepper. It was good for then, you know.
I was very cross that the BBC, in their infinite wisdom, decided to ban some of the tracks, and they wouldn't play it. They wouldn't play A Day in the Life. Why, I don't know. Well, they wouldn't. And they wouldn't play Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds because this rumour went round that it was all connected with drugs, and Lucy in the Sky actually stood for LSD, which wasn't true. And that it was an album which actually was promoting the use of drugs amongst the young. I was aware of them smoking pot. I wasn't aware that they did anything really serious. In fact, I was so innocent that I actually took John up into the roof when he was having an LSD trip, not knowing what it was.
I never took it in the studio. Once I did accidentally. I thought it was taking some uppers. And I was not in a state of handling it, you know, but I took it, and then I just noticed, I suddenly got so scared on the mic, you know. I said, what was it, you know? I said, I feel ill. I thought I felt ill, and it was going, I thought it was going crack, you know, and then I said, I must get some air, and they all took me upstairs on the roof, and George Martin was looking at me funny, you know. And then it dawned on me, I must have taken acid.
So the only place I could take him to get fresh air was on the roof. And we went up there, and it was a wonderful starry night, and he looked up, went to the edge of the 18-inch parapet, and looked up at the stars and said, aren't they fantastic? And of course, to him, they would have been especially fantastic, I suppose. They were just little stars to me at the time.
Paul, how often have you taken LSD?
4 times. The man at the time, the newscaster, showed up and said, is it true you've had drugs? And I made a sort of lightning decision. I thought, well, I'm either going to sort of try and bluff this, they're at my door, I can't, you know, go, no, go away, or I'm just going to tell him. And I thought, sod it, you know. But I did talk to him beforehand, and I said, look, you know what's going to happen here? I'm going to get the blame for telling everyone I take drugs. I said, but you're the people who are going to distribute this thing. I said, I'll tell you. I said, but if you've got any worries about this having an effect on kids, then you don't show it.
Well, do you think you have now encouraged your fans to take drugs?
I don't think it'll make any difference, you know. I don't think my fans are going to take drugs just because I did, you know. But the thing is, that's not the point anyway, you know. I was asked whether I had or not. And then from then on, the whole bit about how far it's going to go and how many people it's going to encourage is up to the newspapers and up to you, you know, on television. I mean, you're spreading this now at this moment. This is going into all the homes, you know, in Britain. And I'd rather it didn't, you know. But you're asking me the question. You want me to be honest. I'll be honest, you know.
I don't know. It just seems strange to me because we'd been trying to get him to take it for about 18 months. And then it just seemed funny that one day he's on the television talking all about it.
The problem was it then gave the press a field day to be on all our cases, you know. I personally didn't think it was any of their business. But, you know, once he said it, You know, whoever said anything in the Beatles, the other three had to deal with it. You know, which we did with all love, because, you know, we loved each other. But I could have done without it myself.
Now, the point about the whole drug scene was the press asked Paul, have you taken LSD? This is how it all came out. Otherwise, we didn't say a word about it, you know? I mean, it was just a personal thing, right?
Well, you see, I feel to this day that, you know, we did take certain substances, but never to a great extent at the sessions. You know, we took a little, but whenever we'd overdid our intake, the music we made was absolutely shit. And you know, we'd go home real happy with the tape, and we'd play it when we got home, and you'd play it the next day, and it was just, every time we'd come back to record again, we'd all look at each other and say, well, we have to do that again, because, you know, it didn't work. It didn't work for the Beatles to be too deranged when making music.
Somebody had said you should invest some money, and we thought, well, let's buy an island. We'll just go there and drop out. We rented a boat, and we drove this boat up and down the coast from Athens, looking at islands, and we came to this island that we arranged to go and see.
And it came to nothing. We didn't buy an island, we came home.
Be someone, but it all works out.